see you tonight. Welcome to the Norman Rockwell Museum. My name is Stephanie Plunkett. I'm Deputy Director and Chief Curator. I'd like to introduce you to Patrick O'Donnell, if you don't know him already. He's one of our wonderful educators. And we're very happy you could come to this very special program featuring the work of Phyllis Kornfeld, who has been an extraordinary presence in the art world, doing some very important work. My great pleasure to introduce you to our intern, Solomon Bennett, who is actually a junior, just started with us today at the Berkshire Waldorf School. And Phyllis actually gave a talk at the Berkshire Waldorf School. When was that, you think?
About a year ago.
About a year ago.
Really?
And
Give or take, yeah.
when we told Solomon that Phyllis was coming to speak, he was so excited about it because he really found her talk at the Waldorf School quite transformational and interesting. So Solomon is going to tell you a little bit more about Phyllis's background, and then we'll just greatly look forward to hearing about your work. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, everybody. Solomon, thank you.
Thank you. I hope I get this all right. We'll see. So from a young age, Phyllis Kornfeld knew that she was destined to be an artist. After high school, she attended the Philadelphia Museum College of Art, now known as the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. And though she was originally looking to pursue a future in advertising art, an advisor of hers suggested that she might look into a career in art education instead. And so following the prudent advice of her advisor, Phyllis began to teach in a wide variety of environments, including kindergarten through grades 12 to junior college, experimental school projects, golden age centers, and museum classes, all while raising 2 children. And years later, she continues to share her knowledge through classes and education, but this time now to men and women who have been incarcerated in county jails and maximum security prisons, offering a vivid and inspiring insight into the stories held in the hearts and souls of the prisoners that she meets.
I've kind of tailored this lecture today for this venue. I'm not going to get very much into the political aspect of this, although that's where my heart is, and that's what I generally talk about, particularly in the discussion period. So I'm going to show you a lot about the art, and I think you'll be quite amazed to see it. So I'll head right into it and get used to this clicker. I started this work in Oklahoma, and this is a medium security prison in Lexington, Oklahoma, called Joseph Harp Correctional Center. The same time I started, there was a new warden, Jack Cowley, who believed so thoroughly and passionately in providing creative opportunities for the men who were incarcerated there, that he opened a clay studio, a painting studio, and a leatherworking studio, which is very rare, very rare. And he told me the reason he believes in it so much, he said, I see incredible changes in a man when he makes art. He stands up straighter, he looks cleaner, he says good morning to people. The first day, let me say, I did not receive any training for working in prisons. I had an idea that there would be tattoo kinds of imagery and maybe portraits of famous people, and that would be it. So I was there, the bountiful art teacher, bringing color and beauty, and I was planning to teach in a conventional way, the ways in which I was taught, having had art lessons my whole life and majoring in it, and my degrees are in art education. So the first day, 12 men came in. Many of them had been doing art. There was no programming there. This drawing came in the arms of a man named Braulio Diaz, a Mexican man, who had been working 24/7 in his cell, making art. He had a few colored pencils and a ballpoint pen. He had about 60 drawings in his arms that he had made on the backs of discarded calendars, inmate request forms, that kind of thing. And this this changed my life. It blew me away. First of all, I don't know how many of you have heard about outsider art, but at this time in 1983 and in Oklahoma, there was no such animal. So I was completely taken by surprise at several things. First of all, I never saw art like this before. Secondly, here's a man who had been in for 15 years with no job, no visitors, no window. I heard all he did was make art in his cell 24/7. And there was a big turnaround for me almost immediately, because what I thought was, okay, wherever this man is coming from, that's what I need to go for. Yeah.
Can you just say his name again?
Braulio Diaz. Braulio Diaz. So what I vowed from that moment was that my job was to address that source in everyone I met and allow it to be activated, to come through. And so that's still my job. I think of myself more of a kind of an excavator more than a teacher. I would say I'm more of an unteacher than a teacher, but above all, I am an excavator. And I'll show you this one more piece. Envelope art is a very traditional art form in prison. If there are no art surfaces to work on, one can always get legal-size envelopes. People also like to decorate them to send them home. And I just wanted to show you some of Diaz, some of Braulio's art. Again, the thing that hits me is the sweetness and joy in this terribly ugly environment that is constantly dehumanizing. Something has been tapped and is being expressed. That's quite extraordinary. This slide is to demonstrate how crucial art is in prison. What I discovered almost immediately was that program or no program, almost everyone in prison is either making art or buying it. And when I say buying it, they're bartering for art. So that was a big surprise, and I think it's ironic and interesting that probably 95% of incarcerated people have not seen art or made art until they became incarcerated. So in a way, this has been a mysterious sort of gift for many of them. So here's this cell. This is in Granite, Oklahoma. Somebody painted on the walls. Now, this was 1983 or 84. I would venture to say that no prison permits this kind of drawing on walls, unless there's a mural project, which is pretty rare these days. Anyway, this is tickling me, and I keep bumping into it. So someone put the tiger on the wall. Someone else put a sticker in the tiger's mouth that says, "Jesus loves you," somewhat mitigating the ferocity of the tiger. And you see the painting is a subject that certain incarcerated people feel victimized by their circumstances. And they are indeed victimized very often. And then on the TV set, which of course is a major item in the cell, is a multi-frame stand. What I'm going to show you to begin with is work that has arisen naturally in prison. I see them as folk arts. And they've become very important because of the environment, because of the lack of materials. And someone comes to prison who's never been there before. It's very frightening, and they're looking around to figure out how to negotiate this crazy environment. And they see everybody's drawing. So people learn to draw almost immediately. And if they don't, they want someone else to draw something for them. This is this is Granite. Jack Cowley moved to a different prison while I was still working in Oklahoma. And he there was a part of the prison that was uninhabitable, but there were these empty, pretty crappy looking cells that he was offering to his well-behaved inmates as a painting studio. So I took this picture. This is just the beginning of someone outfitting this cell, which is an optimistic way of putting it. There probably wasn't too much to add, but this is the beginning of his art studio. And here are these two men sharing a similar cell. So this is one of the major folk arts in prison, is this paper weaving, which people have told me they learned how to do as children in summer camp, something like that. And because the prisoners need to rely on recycled materials, they come up with quite amazing things. So this is made from 45 potato chip bags by Jose Rodriguez. The artist goes around the cell block and asks people not to throw away their potato chip bags. He turns them inside out, washes and dries them, cuts them in strips or tears them in strips, and does this kind of interlocking weaving design. So frame making is very important in prison. Imagine you're away from your loved ones for 15, 20 years, you get a snapshot in, and they become very sacred items. So that's why the making of frames is so popular. I want to say, too, that the artists in prison, the people who make these, are very serious about their medium, about their materials. I just wanted to read this. One man was very upset because the commissary no longer carried Eagle brand potato chips. And he said maybe they still have them on the streets. It had a beach scene on the front, so you had your tan from the sand, your blue and white from the water with the waves, and a big red and white beach umbrella. So you see he had the palette that he needed on the front of Eagle brand potato chips. I saved them for 4 months to do a jewelry box, and a CO comes sweeping through and says, "You can't have this," and he tossed them. Now the thing about that is that it's on the books in every prison that you may not use a substance or any material for a purpose other than that for which it was intended. So this is arbitrarily enforced. I see many times nobody bothers someone, but if a CO, a correctional officer, doesn't like this particular inmate, they will confiscate the work and destroy it. Jack Cowley this is another space that he allowed two Hispanic men for their frame making. Way back then, there was twice a year an annual sort of art festival and battle of the bands, if you can imagine. There's nothing anywhere near like that today. But they bust in the musicians from other Oklahoma State prisons, and also people set up tables out in the prison yard, and the public could come and buy things. So these two men were making frames. They made them out of rolled up paper and scraps of fabric from the prison industry, which was a upholstery shop. That little cuckoo clock in the middle is made from toothpicks. Here's a purse. This is a fabulous purse. I have a couple of these. They no longer smell from tobacco. They did for years. This is made from, I think he said, about 400 packs of cool cigarettes and strung together with dental floss. And the artist is Keith Dwy. So you see the folk art definition works. He learned how to do this not from another generation, but from a cellmate who was about to be released, and he taught Leland how to do this. And I just want to mention that Leland Dodd is serving life without parole for conspiracy to traffic in marijuana. And he's still there. So this is another folk art, soap carving. And in these folk arts, there's a very narrow repertoire of subject matter. This is not necessarily it's a certain kind of creativity. It's certainly a beautiful resourcefulness, and I won't denigrate any of it, because what people are doing is interacting in a very peaceable way to create something beautiful instead of being violent. So this is one of the standard soap carving subjects, is a little treasure chest jewelry box. And there are different means in different prisons by which you can give these or turn them in somewhere, and they will be given to your visitor. So this is a gift for a family member on the outside. And I told you about envelope art. These are more commercial than Broglio's. This man has a locker full of his samples. It reminds me kind of the guy on the street corner in New York that's selling watches, that kind of thing. So if someone wants an envelope, they come to his cell, look through his stash in his Foot Locker, select a design. Then maybe the artist charges, say, a 6-pack of Pepsi for one envelope. The buyer goes to his or her commissary, gets the Pepsi, hands it over to the artist, and receives the envelope. The imagery here is the most common imagery you'll see: hearts and roses, rainbows. The frog, I understand, is a mascot of Puerto Rico, and the kissing swans that make a heart, they're just ubiquitous everywhere. In fact, not too long ago, a new person came to one of my classes, strode in and said to me, I know, no hearts, no roses. So he knew that because my classes are called creative drawing class. So if they're in this business, there's no need for them to be taking the space in the art class. And then we have handkerchief art, which is kind of a companion art form. I'm showing you all these things before the introduction of an art program to these places. So this is the kind of style that I expected. It's a sort of biker / tattoo style of drawing, ballpoint pen. The artist is George Dyson. And again, the handkerchiefs, you can, in any prison, you can go to the commissary and buy 16-inch square, beautiful cotton handkerchiefs that make very good surfaces for ballpoint pen, acrylic paint, colored pencils, and so forth. And this is a big activity in prison. And this is a way, art is a way that the incarcerated people can stay in touch with their families. There have been many studies about there being lower rates of recidivism when the people who are incarcerated are able to keep their family connections going. So imagine if you're in for 15 years and you want to keep contacting your wife or your children, your parents, and every day is the same. Day after day, month after month, year after year, what are you going to put in a letter, right? So this art happens, and the connection is powerful and beautiful. For example, the artist, the person receives a photograph of a new baby in the family, and gives it to an artist, in this case, this man, to enlarge the photograph. Then one of the advantages of working on a handkerchief is you can fold it up and put it in an envelope and send it home. So the drawing is sent home. The family, the expansion, the enlargement of the baby's face is sent home. The family frames it, hangs it up over the mantle, takes a picture of it hanging over the mantle, sends the photograph back inside to the person who made it. And so this keeps the connection very, very powerful, and it keeps it going. There's someone who was at my lecture about a year ago at a university told me this little story. I had a very dear roommate when I lived in California, Marvin Cruz. Growing up, he never had his father due to his being incarcerated in a federal penitentiary. He stressed he would never talk to him again. But Marvin's father would send artwork on handkerchiefs all the time, which told stories. My friends and I were extremely impressed with the level of talent that went into the art, and we could see slowly it was breaking into Cruz's unforgiving soul. Then finally, after several years of refusing to talk to his father, I see Cruz up in the middle of the night drawing his own picture, which he intended to send to this father that he had not spoken to in over a decade. I expected, of course, to see tattoo imagery. Tattooing is forbidden in all correctional facilities. Nevertheless, it seems to thrive, especially in the higher security prisons. I hear stories all the time about the electricity going out on a tier in the middle of the night, which means a tattooist is plying his trade. And I'm just showing you one example. Also, the iconography is taken very seriously. You can see this man, Steve Colley, is into Oriental art. And so he's been building this shirt, skin shirt, I forget what he called it. The red coloring comes from Robitussin cough syrup. The green is from Perel shampoo. The black, if I had a whole hour, I could tell you all the ways in which I learned the recipes for making something that can be used as black tattoo ink. And just briefly, the first week I was at Joseph Harp, I brought in a jar of India ink, well, it was the second week, for two men who were doing beautiful line drawings. When I came back the next week, our locker had been broken into. They stole a can of fixative, which the guards told me had been used for a little party for some of the inmates. And of course, the ink was gone. So I tried one more week. I said to these men, look, just don't take your eyes off of this ink. And I hardly blinked, and it was gone. So that was the end. That was the end. And over the years, I've seen a lot of black medium that tends to disappear. So yeah, some other time I'll tell you how they make the black ink. I just wanted to show you a couple of places. The art class has always been held in multi-purpose spaces. This is Oklahoma. We had our class for a long time in the staff dining room. So we couldn't put the art up or anything, but of course, everyone, the people who are incarcerated, the gift of having an art class is so great and so valued and appreciated that there's never a complaint about any of the circumstances whatsoever. And now I'm introducing the art class to you, where I've worked. I counted up once. I've worked in 18 facilities over the years, but for long periods of time, I've worked in about 6 or 7 correctional facilities. Some for as long as 16, 17, 18 years. Some people have been in my class for 8 years. And I've worked with them weekly for 8 years. One of the major things that I say to people is that your job is to create beauty. I'm not an art therapist. Of course, making any kind of art is therapeutic. But my greatest goal is for them to create beautiful art, beautiful, fresh art. And this is in another facility in Oklahoma. I just want to show you this because the men and women live in very cramped quarters. The light is bad. They work up close to their artwork. So one of the constants in my guidance or my excavation is to get as much space between you and your artwork as possible. So at least in the very beginning, you're working the whole piece, because the inclination, here they are in this big, bright, beautiful, sunny art room, high ceilings, big windows, and you can see they're all have their noses practically in their paper. So this is one of the important things for them to learn. When I moved to Massachusetts, I got a full-time job, believe it or not, with the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. And they assigned me to 3 facilities. They were all men's prisons because the women's prison at Framingham had some sort of arts and crafts program happening already. So they assigned me to Walpole Maximum Security, 1 class for the general population and 1 class for the segregation unit, the punishment unit, and then 2 medium security prisons. This is Norfolk, MCI Norfolk, Massachusetts Correctional Institute at Norfolk. After about a year of being there and causing very little trouble for the security department, they allowed me to bring acrylic paint in, and I had the idea to work on this large collaboration where I either bribed or coerced everyone to do their self-portrait and to help me do the bricks and the books. And of course, mostly I ended up doing those myself. So, and you can see through the open door, this was a huge compound. And as to your question, or my comment about being up and down, this was, these years in the Massachusetts prisons, and these prisons were hotbed of creativity. I could tell the first time I walked through here, there was a lot of programming, and there was just a feel about the place, a kind of a field. And so you can kind of see the flavor here. So a lot of these men just made a very straightforward self-portrait. Some of them wanted to tell us more about themselves. For example, the man in the bubble was a sex offender, so he's depicting his isolation or ostracization from the other men in the class. And at that time, I was not permitted to use a luggage carrier because you have those big metal bars that could be used as weapons. So I was kind of a perennial bag lady. I was always carrying these big, heavy bags. And I loved every minute of it. I introduced doodling very early on. People like Braulio Diaz and some of the other people I'm going to show you didn't need a word from me. I just needed to offer the materials and get out of the way. There was something pouring out of them immediately. But when there wasn't, I always assigned doodling to everyone in my class. I still do. It's a weekly practice. I liken it to meditation. It will teach you a different relationship to your thoughts. The way I assign the doodling is that you must put your mind elsewhere, not just dreaming about home or anything like that, but I want you to be either listening to the radio. Most of us doodle, if you do, on the phone or in class, in circumstances where we're listening to something. Our mind is on something else, and we just are, without intention, doodling. I've heard some confusion between doodling and sketching. To me, there's a major difference. When you're sketching, there is intention. You have a reason. You're either looking at something, trying to figure out how to do your drawing. Doodling is the absence of intention, and the object is to learn to draw without the conditioned mind. So some people struggle with it, some people get it right away. The piece you're looking at is by Anthony Arose. I met him, I did a weekend workshops at 3 California prisons. This was at Vacaville, which was for the criminally insane and handicapped, all kinds of handicapped inmates. They had an amazing art program there. It looked like a junior college. They had 3 rooms this size, one for fiber arts, one for ceramics, and the other was for painting and drawing. So Anthony took me over to his very conventional still life on the easel. It was a charcoal still life with, a wine bottle and a bowl of fruit kind of thing, and he was having so much trouble with the bowl and so on. And then when I introduced doodling, it was like a fire was lit under him. He was standing up and practically shredding the paper that he drew so hard. When it came time for the men to go back to their units. They could hardly pull him away. And so you can see, even though there are a few semi-recognizable things here, you can see there's no self-consciousness, there's no preconceived idea of what I'm going to draw. This just poured out of him. Here's another, this is pure doodling. It's very unusual, really. It could be a commercially viable or very fine high art drawing. It has a sense of humor, and yet there's no subject matter, which I think is interesting. If someone intentionally that I've met who's incarcerated tells me they draw abstracts, that's what they call it, I draw abstracts. What they mean is they do very conventional, sort of kind of cliche abstracts where there are not only the usual geometric figures, but lightning bolts and floating eyeballs are two of the major images that when they feel that they're doing abstracts. And yet, I just wanted to show you a few works that people did once they got in the groove with doodling. There's been very little abstract or non-objective art that I've seen in 34 years. It doesn't seem to come naturally, and I understand that because there's generally theory, art theory, behind abstraction. And this artist is Yolanda, I forget her last name, I can't read it. Rivera. Yes, Yolanda Rivera, and this was in county jail. This is at the Hampden County Jail. It's quite amazingly fresh, right? The artist here, Adalberto Vasquez, was simply doodling, and he just doodled a few lines, and then it struck him that that was enough. So he added the color. And this is just one of many, many stunning drawings that he made with colored pencil that were completely non-objective, that arose out of the doodling. And I remember they roll their eyes at me all the time because when he came in with this, I was just amazed, and I loved it, and I told him how beautiful it was, and he kept doing it. And at one point, I asked him, "Do you know what you're accomplishing here? Do you know what you've discovered?" He said, "I don't know. I only do what you tell me, and this is what happens." So I thought that was great and beautiful. And that's about it for the abstract work. Now, I'd like you to meet Charles Mosby, who I met at MCI Norfolk. This drawing is called Prison Art Class. Charles had already been in for something like 12 years. And he told me that he joined the art class because he felt that he was going insane, having nothing to do. His first drawings had these weird characters in them, and he believed sincerely that this was proof of his insanity. So what I did was I brought in some artwork by Paul Klee and Joe Miro and other artists who are in the same sort of track or arena or genre, and showed them to him. And I said, Charles, the source of your work is exactly the same source of this work, except these people they've had different lives and different opportunities. So he believed me because it's true. And so he relaxed and just made the most incredible artwork. In this case, this is what art class meant to him. Imagine where he lives, right? And look at these creatures. They're his alone in the universe. Here's one of his first paintings. It's a self-portrait. He said he is the four-legged figure with a cheerful orange conscience on his back. He's basically a good fellow whose head was filled with demons. He is spitting out pain, sorrow, and evil because he can't digest them. Sometimes he said he makes what he calls a statement painting. This is called drug usage equals enslavement, imprisonment, and death. So in his work, it's about his life and also about his inner life. The thing about this is called uncasia, is this joy, this pure joy. And when you think of the cell block and the cell and the darkness and the dehumanization and the strength and power and presence of a deep, strong joy in a human being, and it's still a mystery. It's quite amazing. He said, I'm a wiser person now. I no longer run from goodness. I've shown the world how evil I can be, and now I want to show the goodness in me. This goodness was always in me. That's very important. Hardly any people know that, and I'm selling that message hard and constant. This goodness was always in me, and I drowned it with alcohol. My incarceration is hard, but it is not wasteful. I will come out of here with compassion. At Norfolk, I also met John Harvey. Now, these people I'm showing you have not made art since they were young children. So, and I do not teach any of the traditional lessons of conventional art lessons. I don't talk about composition. I don't talk about color. I don't talk about any of the ways in which we learn, say, to draw realistically. And his sense of design, I think, is quite extraordinary. He could be an incredibly successful graphic artist, for one thing. And also the gesture, yeah.
What is that material? What are those materials that he's using?
The materials he's using, he uses paint stick, oil stick. I mean, I don't think he's still using it, but yeah, paint stick. And here's another, this is called The Businessman. So many of these works that I'm going to show you, they are narrative. They are somewhat related to the artist of this who is being honored in this building, in the sense that we're getting his lifestyle, his times, and the place in which he lived his life. So here's another example. The composition and the design of this is just stunning, and it's completely intuitive. He asked me at one point if it's okay to write on his drawings. And John was raised in a very strict Southern Baptist home by a single mother, and went to Bible study all the time. So I said, yes, of course you can write on it. We've all seen art that way, but he never did. And indeed, I was running to the Bible often because sometimes I couldn't believe the scripture that was included, but he always got it right. So he often used the figure of the dog as it is represented in the Bible. According to him, I'm not an expert on the Bible at all, but he said the dog is often a metaphor for an abominable creature who will not make it into heaven. And John, unselfconsciously and not with any particular intention, has shown the dog as the religious figure. And he often showed the religious figure as the perpetrator of the sex and the violence in his artwork. He said, I don't know the whole Bible by heart, but I know what I need so the preacher can't fool me. Then here's again an anti-drug statement. I've seen a lot of work about drug usage over the years, and sometimes it's very cliche and very victimized, and it seems to me unhealthy. because the person is kind of, you can tell by the artwork, they're trying to get back into that world in this way. But other people, this is a whole different expression about it, and it's a very powerful message, isn't it? As a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. When I die, bury me deep, put a bottle of wine at my head and at my feet, and let me drink my way from hell to the promised land. So his subject matter was all over the place, lighthearted and very heavy duty. Again, look at the composition and the design, which is nothing that he thought about. Just to remind you of the environment that we're talking about, this is Walpole, maximum security, the inner perimeter. I met a lot of amazing artists there, among them Ronnie White, who is still incarcerated. Ronnie was what they call a pen man. He was a virtuoso with a ballpoint pen. In all prisons, if they have nothing else in their cell to work with, they give them a half-size, flexible ballpoint pen. And that's what Ronnie used for his artwork. There are facilities where they're not permitted to have a pencil in their cell. Even I brought in buckets of acrylic paint to maximum security to the segregation unit. But in some county jails, I could give them nothing. Nevertheless, they kept making art. So this is Ronnie's work. This was he's one of the few people I've met in all these years who already had some skill and identified himself as an artist. This is one of his recent Christmas cards. And he only did this to make money for commissary. This was done in the segregation unit at Walpole. I was permitted at that time to go down into the segregation unit and go visit him in his cell. This was one of the worst, dreadful prison environments I've been in, and they're terrible. I mean, I can't tell you how awful. And Ronnie made this drawing. You can see it's a self-portrait. That's him in his bed. And very often his artwork shows good and evil at the same time in the drawing. So we have the goodness in the foreground and the evil over there sitting on the toilet. This is called Dreamtime. Dreamtime was a response to all the hostility, the dead air filled with hatred, the spitefulness, the spit and filth covering the walls, the roaches all over the place. Here's Ronnie's drawing from another prison. He's still incarcerated. He is a nonviolent drug offender, and he's still inside. You can see the influence of the doodling, because what he did was doodle in a certain way, little tight, scrunchy doodling, and as soon as he would see something that looked like a face, which, by the way, is something that our brains do commonly, like when we see a face in the man in the moon, or we see figures in the clouds. It's called pareidolia. And so Ronnie felt as though it was the spirits of the night visiting him. He would bring these drawings in and say, look at this figure, look at this person. And he didn't know where they were coming from. This is called Conquered. Sometimes I'm contacted by people writing books who want artwork for the cover or for illustration in the inside of the book. In this case, Ronnie's drawing was selected for the cover. He is not a violent offender, so I made sure in the back of the book where he was giving credit that it said that he was a nonviolent offender. And this is called Blending In. I know deep in my soul I have the makings of a master in my blood, and it may take a lifetime to perfect my talent. I realize this because when I'm working, sometimes I get these excitable feelings like I'm really onto something, and the path is easy to follow. It's not my mind that's giving me these messages. It's my soul. I want my work to be recognized for what it truly is, as pure as snow. This is our half of a collaboration that we made at Walpole, maximum security. We were down in the basement, and you can see through that window that we're below ground. There was no one else in this basement. The door at the head of the stairs was locked. There were no officers down here, except every once in a while someone would come down. And the man in the other room, they were all mostly empty rooms. There used to be a large vocational department here. The man in the second room is Bill Engelhardt. He was my bathroom guide because this was a big empty basement, and at the far end of the corridor was darkness, and that was it. So when I left the class to go down the hall to the bathroom, Bill was my guard. And the man with his back to us is Arthur Kegney. I'll show you some of his work in a minute. And I'm not quite, and the reproductions are all reproductions of the real work that they were doing. This is the other end of it. And we have here, I don't remember this man, but in the blue sweats is Tyrone, who is a lifer. And the other man is Jimmy Connors, depicting himself with his beloved cigar and fried chicken. And then someone painted a very flimsy, skinny, weak-looking correctional officer passing by in the hall. So Tyrone and Jimmy got together and made a Christmas card for me. That's me. Tyrone and Jimmy get to work. It's Phyllis. Just to give you an idea of how demanding I am. One winter in the segregation unit, we had to have class in the weight room. And so it was freezing cold in there. Everybody had to dress pretty warm, at least I did. And there was just in this small room, just this one big conglomeration of equipment. So the men, as I said, no complaints whatsoever. And of course I didn't complain either. They just set themselves down wherever they could set their work down in whatever way made sense, and they were focused and concentrated the whole time. We had class in this room for a couple of months during one winter. This is my artwork. And then in the Norman Rockwell vein, people did artwork about, very few about their childhood, I must say, because 99.9 have had very ugly childhoods. But there have been pictures of the neighborhood, and this is by Raleigh. This is by Butchie Reed, Arthur Reed. Everyone in prison has a nickname, just about. So his nickname was Butchie. And he did this drawing of Charlestown, which at the time was called the carjacking, bank robbing capital of America by the FBI. So there are many little stories here, stories in each window, and a robbery taking place down here in front of the shop. And this is The Neighborhood by Arthur Kegney. Now, I've always thought of him as the Norman Rockwell of the netherworld. Not that because first of all, he's a documentarian of his time and place. His memory for the detail is incredible. And I noticed something a while back, things like slouching socks that Norman Rockwell puts on a lot of his young children. Their socks are baggy, that kind of thing. There's a scrap of something hanging out of somebody's back pocket. And this is a true picture of his neighborhood with, this is totally natural, the gesturing. You can see the artist's mother is the woman with the grocery bag talking to this other woman. You can almost hear their conversation. When I was in art school, you were told to never put a circle smack in the middle of your composition because the eye gets stuck there. Now, of course, that's the purpose here. So much of Norman Rockwell's magazine covers are set within a central circle because he's pulling our attention. And another thing that Rockwell does frequently and beautifully is lead our eye around the composition. So you can see that's just exactly what Arthur is doing here, just completely intuitively, again. So we don't get locked on the figure of one-legged old lady Jackson. And this is Charlestown in the 40s, in the late 40s.
Charleston where? What state?
Charlestown, Massachusetts. I think it's been gentrified by now, but it wasn't at the time. So this is Arthur as a child. Arthur's father strangled Arthur's sister to death in a drunken rage when Arthur was about 12 or 9, something like that. And his mother brought him to this Esso station every Sunday because his father could go to the chapel on Sunday, and the window of the chapel had a view of the gas station. So this is how they visited every Sunday. This is called prison visit. And there's just a little white speck in the upper right-hand corner, which is Arthur's father waving to him. In the early 70s in Walpole, some of the cell blocks were out of control. The guards couldn't get in and the men couldn't get out, but had the run of the cell block. So these guys are getting away with murder in here. The guys sitting around the table are drinking home brew mixed with Tang orange drink, etc. The 3 holy rollers in 26 are reading the Bible. In cell 40, the guy is sleeping, a risky business in those days. This really happened in the segregation unit. And here's another example. Arthur's, this is a little soap carving that he made that was used for the cover of this book. It's just 1 bar of soap painted with acrylic paint. He was also a humorist. I read the other day the Dalai Lama talking about that the words humor and humility come from the same root, which is humus, or H-U-M-O-S, and it's also the root of the word humanity. This is the early pre-release program. This is a man about to be executed in disguise as a bird, as an endangered species. And you can see the disrespect for a not very bright correctional officer who believed him enough to call the warden to try to get the execution canceled. A quick look at Larry Mox. I just wanted to show you this because this is about what happens to a person when they're incarcerated. He came in as a regular person, and because of the humiliation and constant punishment, I'm sure you've heard this said before, but it's quite a lot of punishment to be incarcerated. And yet the culture demands that the punishment and humiliation continues. Not everywhere, not from everyone, but often. And so also I wanted to mention the James Gilligan, who used to live here in West Stockbridge, who is an expert on violence. He's written a number of books about the prevention of violence. And what he says is that punishment stimulates violence. And the more severe the punishment, the more severe the violence. And there are plenty of statistics to back that up. You may have noticed I haven't been talking about women. That's because I haven't had the pleasure and opportunity to work much with women. I did in Oklahoma for a while, and I did in county jail for a while, but mostly I've been working with men. Crystal Stimson was doing 27 years in Oklahoma. And I included this piece not because it's a fabulous painting, but because it's so poignant, and I think it gives a real strong feeling of what it must be like to be incarcerated. It's called Snake Dream. And this is Crystal's painting. She served 27 years. When I asked her how would her life be different when she gets out, because she's been doing art, she said, I can have, and this is after she was released, I flew to Oklahoma to have dinner with her. I can have a conversation with anyone, a banker or a professor, and if we talk about the design tooled on his saddle, She lives in Oklahoma. Or the craft project his grandchild made, I don't feel like an outsider. My experience with art allows me to connect with different kinds of people. Sometimes I can even teach them. And Crystal's painting about the 50 of the women being sent to a for-profit prison for 2 years, awakened in the middle of the night and bussed a couple states over. And it was selected for the cover of this book. This is sort of a classic still life. It's an acrylic painting called Prison Life. These are her cherished items. It's her self-portrait behind bars. Very moving, I think she says that the doll still has a heart despite the crimes she might be guilty of. Margarita Falcone was in county jail when I met her. This is the belt my father hit me with. This is the closet he locked me in. This is the stove he burnt me on. Here I am, kneeling on the little carpet with the tacks sticking up through it, balancing a heavy grindstone on my head. Because I love you, that's what he told me. The title is Because I Love You. That's what he told her. There are very, very few pieces that refer to a person's childhood abuse, even though it's very common. Toilet paper sculpture made by Dominic Vincenzo called Released by Death. An old-timer has secured his release by overdosing himself. So this is made from toilet paper and painted with acrylic paint. So I'm showing you this soap carving. These are people who are in the art class, and when they would go back to their cells, they were three-dimensional artists. So this is a soap carving that he made. It's called No One Cares, and it's a story of a jailbreak. And these two men, one man is impaled on the razor wire, the other has fallen to the ground and is bloody and dead, and the passersby are paying no attention. So this is called No One Cares. This was made by Medow, with Greg Medow. He made sculptures. He made a statue of the Statue of Liberty out of toilet paper, and the Lincoln Memorial out of toilet paper. And this piece, Mount Rushmore, the mountain is toilet paper. The faces are modeled from toothpaste. So, and this is this kind of spirit and joyfulness and urge to create in a lighthearted way is what I keep running into in this most devastating of environments. And I just wanted to say about Greg, he made, the last time he was in jail, he made something that they just told me about because it was immediately confiscated for the reason that I told you before, is that it's against the rules. But he made, I don't know if you saw this, Helen, but he made a castle out of Cheetos. Did you hear about that? He made a castle out of Cheetos with a serrated wall and tower, and the Cheetos were stuck together with toothpaste. So this, of course, was immediately confiscated and destroyed. But I mean, still, he made it. That's the point. And I just wanted to show you, this is back to Braulio Diaz when he was in the art class. I was scrounging into dumpsters and got some old window shades, large window shades that he could paint on. This is a very large painting that he made called Condominium. And you can see he's included everything good and beautiful that he could think of. So I'm just going to close by introducing you to a few other guys. This is Anthony, who is obviously a graffiti artist who had so much struggle with doodling, he could never do it because he was afraid that he would lose his graffiti skills. Then the last day, his last day in class, he strode in and he said, "You know what, I get it." And he discovered that he did not need to lose any of his skills and that he could still be fully creative and personal about it. He included this quote by Van Gogh: "If you hear a voice within you say you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced." This is Cyrus. We have here Larry White, who has been in for 30 years. So look at his self-portrait and his cell. The only things that looked real are the artwork and the books on the wall. Everything else is about his inner experience. I think it's incredible the way he drew himself. It says so much, and believe me, he didn't figure it out ahead of time. And here we have Lionel. This is his last day of class. They pack their possessions up in white garbage bags. So I asked Lionel the same question that I asked Crystal. What will have changed for you when you get out because you've been making art? And what he said to me was, I learned to exercise my gift. I'll have a purpose. Thank you. That's it.